All right, the Madlanga Commission adjourns for the day. In the last while, the debates were really around administrative issues around the supplementary statement that Vusimuzi Cat Matlala will be supplying to the Commission. His attorney advocate, Thembekile, telling the Commission that they will submit an application to the Commission by Friday, and evidence leader Matlala then coming back to say, that they would need at least 24 hours to respond. The Madlanga Commission ruling there that the continuation, or at least Matlala's testimony, is then postponed to the 25th and the 26th of August, and warning there that no slippages to the dates will be tolerated. So in other words, giving them plenty of time then to submit those necessary papers. 21st August being the supplementary statement and answering affidavit, and must be filed that very next day. The replying affidavit on the 22nd of August. Thembekile Mrototo is monitoring developments for us. Thembekile, I might have gotten my dates wrong, but I do believe then that Matlala's testimony has been postponed to the 25th and 26th of August. Give us a sense then in terms of, firstly, the administrative issues that were discussed now in the last while at the Commission in terms of that supplementary statement that Matlala will be submitting, and of course some of the key highlights from today's testimony.
Unachi, good afternoon. So, Vusimuzi Cat Matlala's appearance at the Madlanga Commission has now been postponed to start on the 24th and run possibly until the 26th. But the two dates that are on in the diary, at least for the Commission, for the continuation of his testimony, I believe, is the 24th and the 25th of August. So that's next week, Monday and Tuesday, unless, of course, there's a need to roll over into a third day, which would then go into the 26th of this month. What has to happen now is that, remember, right from the beginning, his advocate, Thembekile, spoke about how Matlala would have to file a supplementary affidavit dealing in detail with some matters of law that ultimately has also resulted in him choosing not to answer certain questions today in the reading of his statement into the record. And speaking of that, it was a bit like pushing a truck up Table Mountain, I suppose, at some point, as evidence leader advocate Matlala SC tried to extract information, if you will, from Vusimuzi Cat Matlala, things to do with his relationship with Brown Mokhotsi, Hangwani Maumela, and other figures, seemingly difficult, or in fact choosing not to answer those questions, saying because of his ongoing criminal trial, as well as other cases that may arise, he feared that he would incriminate himself by going into some of that detail. Let's bring in SABC News senior reporter Canny Maphanga, who's with me here at the Bridget Mabandla Justice College. Canny, I hope I got the dates right. It is the 24th, possibly until the 26th of August. Let's talk about what has to go into the paperwork that now has to be filed between the end of this week and then.
Absolutely. Well, good afternoon to you, Thembekile, and to the viewers at home. Now, because alleged cartel member Vusimuzi Cat Matlala, I think we can agree today, could not be of much assistance to the Madlanga Commission, because for majority of the testimony he invoked his right against self-incrimination. The difficulty is that he invoked it in broad terms, so without any substantiation, and because of that the Commission was seeking answers as to why this is not a topic that cannot be discussed further, or why he holds the view that if he were to testify on some of these issues that he would self-incriminate.
Right.
And in terms of the evidence, we could understand in terms of Medicare 24, because that's a case that's currently before courts, but he was also invoking it on a number of different issues where that privilege didn't exist. So that substantiation now needs to be made in a substantive application, which he is set to file in a few days, and then of course it's going to be accompanied by the supplementary affidavit where he will expand on issues that he didn't touch on in terms of the very short and very vague statement that he's offered to the Commission now. In the main, what we've seen is a number of denials, but no test to the denials. There's also subjects that he's chosen not to venture into, such as Lieutenant General Shajik Sabir and the Impalas. and the alleged relationship that may have continued between the pair through Sergeant Fanny Nkosi, or at least that's what the evidence suggests.
Right.
All of those critical details that have nothing to do with his matters before court, he's chosen not to discuss those matters. So that is something that must also be explained in the supplementary affidavit. So not much from alleged cartel member Vusimuzi Cat Matlala today, other than the evidence that he gives about Brian Mokgotsi, where he stated that he quote-unquote hates him and that he caused a lot of trouble for him. But outside of that, we really have no evidence from Cat Matlala as of today that takes the evidence further in terms of disputing or confirming any of the allegations that have been built up against him since phase 1 of this hearing commencing.
And I'm hoping we'll get a bit more time to talk about this, because while Matlala said very little, there is quite a bit that the Commission wants to hear from him, because he is ultimately one of the central figures to why this very commission exists. He's denied any sort of relationship with Police Minister Senzo Mchunu. Interestingly, he does confirm that he at some point appeared to be involved in a plot with Mchunu's predecessor, Thembekile, where they then were trying to use Brown Mokgotsi in some sort of scheme. But there's also confirmation in here somewhere that Mchunu wanted to replace General Dumisani Khumalo with General Khan, both at Crime Intelligence.
So let's separate the issues. First, we meet Cat Matlala as the alleged person who is funding the alleged political ambitions of Police Minister Senzo Mchunu. And that's how he is introduced in the original July media briefing with those explosive allegations. We then get to the evidence of Brown Mokgotsi, and it shows us that Cat Matlala is now giving a lot of money and monetary gifts and favors, etc., to Brown Mokgotsi, even down to the January 8th, where he had paid for the accommodation, the flights, even money for entertainment, let's put it that way. And at all times, it shows in the WhatsApp exchanges that he believes that he is doing so because of this contract that he seeks to safeguard. Although he now walks it back and states that at the time he believed that this person was either trying to swindle him for money, or at the very least he may have been working with Police Minister Senzo Mchunu. That is still in the air in terms of what the true dynamic between this trio was. But at the very least, it's pointing to allegations of Brown Mokgotsi allegedly using his close proximity to Police Minister Senzo Mchunu in order to allegedly swindle certain individuals, such as alleged cartel member Vusimuzi Cat Matlala. And that's something that when he got arrested is something that he spoke about in quite great detail, not only in the WhatsApps, but also in that recording, which he now disputes. And because there's a lot of issues that Cat Matlala has to answer to that's tied to different individuals and different cases, he's found a way to invoke that self-incrimination right, to walk away from some of the questions that he'll have to answer. But in terms of where the right doesn't exist, you're seeing him not answer the questions at all. So, for example, with Lieutenant General Shadrick Sibia, we see with the Impalas that the farmer himself sent a voice note from Cat to Cat, and then Cat forwards it to Sergeant Fanny Nkosi because he is the alleged middleman for Lieutenant General Shadrick Sibia. And we do eventually see that there are Impalas on that particular property. Be that as it may, I think the Impalas did pass away on that particular plot, but they were there.
Right.
There are conversations where you see that at every turn, Sergeant Fanny Nkosi is the middleman. So where Sibia sends a message to Sergeant Fanny Nkosi to say, tell Cat to make a turn, that is in direct reference to alleged cartel member Vusimuzi Cat Matlala. These are all allegations that have nothing to do with his current cases before the criminal courts, but he has elected not to deal with those particular subjects. If we turn to Major General Richard Shabiri and the loan for his family gathering, that's evidence that's in hard proof before the Madlanga Commission, but he again chooses not to deal with that particular evidence, and he has to substantiate why he is isolating issues and choosing here to invoke his right against self-incrimination, and then on others to be completely silent on those matters. So we'll see what comes up in the supplementary statement, but from today there is absolutely nothing that Cat Matlala said that advanced any of the allegations or the evidence, but seemingly he is holding on to distancing himself from certain high-ranking SABC officials But in the main, Police Minister Senzo Mchunu, and that is the route to which we see this commission being established, is that it was alleged that the PKTT disbandment was done to allegedly serve cartel interests, and such an individual who was named in that allegation was Vusimuzi Cat Matlala.
Briefly, Canny, that oral, verbal loan agreement of Suleiman Karim, who we know his lawyers have fought tooth and nail to prevent him coming to appear here, citing his poor health. What is the link there? But also Canny Maphanga, we've not heard a lot about him, at least not at the commission, but he's been linked to other alleged wrongdoing beyond the mandate of this commission. Is Matlala the witness that we expect may have to face a lot more questions about both men?
Well, Suleiman Karim is off the table at this point, at least before the Madlanga Commission, and we do know that when Cat Matlala got his first payment, he made a payment to Suleiman Karim, and then Suleiman Karim makes a third-party payment to Morgan Maumela.
15 million rand, right?
Absolutely, and there's a transaction that shows that there's multiple layers to that evidence, because it deals with the allegations in chief that these alleged cartels mixed with different elements, and part of those elements is tenders and the subsequent funds that flow from tenders. Now, because he's pretty much the only one who can explain what those transactions were about, he's electing not to do so, invoking yet again that right against self-incrimination and choosing not to go into details because he fears that he may incriminate himself in that evidence. Although he concedes to the fact that he knows both individuals, even says that Morgan Maumela is a friend as well, acknowledges the individuals, but doesn't want to go into any of the business dealings. This is why we reached the conclusion today that a lot of what he testified about today was literally just placing the denials on record, but not really taking the evidence further in terms of what he has to answer to. He's at the heart of the allegations and at the heart of understanding what could be, if it does exist, any role that Police Minister Senzo Mchunu could have allegedly played that could have been adverse in this PKTT disbandment directive or decision. And in order to understand that, one of the many elements you have to turn to is Vusimuzi Cat Matlala, and whether or not he had an alleged improper relationship not only with high-ranking subs generals, but also with the Police Minister Senzo Mchunu.
Just lastly, on Matlala's evasiveness, as one would put it, that also got his lawyer, Advocate Annelien van den Heever, in a bit of trouble with the commission, because at some point she was basically accused of trying to testify on his behalf. In fact, Commissioner Baloyi used stronger language, saying that she was behaving improperly.
Absolutely, and it's clear at this point that the legal team recognize that they are in a bit of an advantageous position, because a lot of the cases that he has to answer to have really been severely criticized before the probe and almost dismantled for the amount of illegalities that followed the probe, particularly the Medicare 24/4 case. So it's likely that you wouldn't want your witness to comment on anything that could be of assistance in prosecuting that particular matter or the criminal process that takes place. So it came across as if the lawyer was trying to speak on his behalf, or at least give him some form of answers in terms of the tough questions that he was facing. And it seems that from the beginning of his evidence this morning and where we leave off now, there isn't really anywhere that you can take the evidence so far, and it remains to be seen with the supplementary affidavit and the application with the points in limine whether or not they're able to convince the commission that some of these issues simply cannot be touched because of the fact that they're before courts. It's an investigation, you're disputing the recordings where you spilled all the beans after you were arrested. Without any of that information, it leaves a lot of the evidence with respect to what informs this commission a bit stagnant, because now we don't have an understanding as to whether or not this directive, which has been to some extent shown as something that was quite rushed and didn't follow due process, was it informed by an alleged ulterior purpose, which is to allegedly serve these cartel interests. We'll see when he returns on the 24th and 25th next week whether or not he can provide those answers for the commission.
Right, we'll leave it there for now. SABC News senior reporter Canny Maphanga with me here at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry. It resumes, that's the commission, at 9:30 tomorrow morning with a different witness. That's until Cat Matlala, Vusimuzi Cat Matlala, returns to the commission on the 24th of August. We're also expecting to hear more testimony throughout this week.